Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's edition of the Blame Game. It's Groups Week 1, and yeah, I fled to my parents' house in Boston. That's why you see this jank setup, and I apologize if the mic is not quite up to standard. This is my travel setup since I forgot to bring up my microphone, and I'm wearing black for the funeral for North America. Obviously, things are not going well, and there is a heap of topics all over Reddit right now and a buffet to choose from. But I'm actually going to keep this pretty narrow to Week 1 gameplay for now. There's a ton of systemic questions and the future of North America and all these kinds of things people are talking about. We'll have plenty of time to get to those in the future. For now, we're only Week 1. I want to talk about gameplay. We're going to talk about gameplay, as well as what teams might be trying, hopefully, in Week 2 and whatnot, and digging into just some community criticism. So I'm going to take a really narrow lens initially, actually, on one of the most criticized members in the community to then kind of use that as a example for talking about North America. So that means we're going to be talking about Fudge here. He has been destroyed by the community for so many aspects of him right now. His personality being too brash, his practice methods, his picks, how he's playing in the games. The ones I want to focus on again are things more on the Rift for right now. So talking about specifically how he's playing as well as the picks he's going for. The general criticism is that Fudge is playing poorly and his picks are ego drafts into the enemy teams that are obviously world-class caliber top laners that he cannot do the same things he did to North America to, and he really shouldn't be trying this and should be playing tanks. Is this fair criticism to have of Fudge? Let's get the obvious out of the way. Yeah, we're playing terrible. North America as a whole, Fudge, there's very few standout players. There's a couple you can kind of point to us doing okay, but for the most part, we're doing terribly. And this is reflected in our record. This is the first time in history North America has picked up 0 wins for the first round robin. And worse than that, we're trending down. We actually used to be a meme because we would win early and then it was week 2 NA. You can see that we had a lot of week 1s where we actually picked up 6 wins, majority wins. And then that started changing. And groups did start getting harder, which is fair. I think we also, you could argue, started to do worse. And the storyline flipped from being win week 1, lose week 2 to lose week 1 and win week 2, where once the pressure was off North American teams, then they would kind of start picking up wins once they were mathematically eliminated or whatever. And we would finish 2 and 4, not make it out, but hey, we were able to pick up some wins and still be respectable. Here, we're not even winning week 1, and this is the worst it's ever been. We'll see if we can bounce back week 2 and pick up some wins and save our name a little bit, but I just want to highlight this fact to say, yes, we are playing terribly. The first time we've been on North American soil in 6 years, and we go out and lay this egg, I completely empathize and understand with the frustration that fans are feeling. However, this doesn't mean that the criticism is always 100% right. People are upset that Fudge is playing carries. But this is the exact style that Cloud9 used to win in North America. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, we're not in North America now, Mark, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I at least want to highlight why Cloud9 is probably playing this way. Fudge was able to dumpster everyone in playoffs as being one of the only people who could play the carry counter picks into a lot of the meta champions. He could play the Fiora into the Aatrox and whatnot for North America standards. And that was a huge part of why they were able to destroy what was a very close playoffs in North America. Cloud9 was clearly head and shoulders above everyone else. Obviously, Berserker was a beast and Sven could get by on Enchanters and just kind of buff him up. And that part has changed a little bit in the meta, but more or less, I think Cloud9 is approaching the games the same way that they approach them in North America. A lot of people are basically asking Fudge to tuck his tail between his legs, assume he's worse than his competition, and just play scaling weak side tank tops. But I have to tell you, I have been so sick of watching our top laners do that for years at Worlds. There was maybe some times where we did play the carries and whatnot, but for a lot of the recent years with things like Camille were meta top, or when there was an Akali meta, or whatever it was, whenever there was any sort of carry top meta, our teams would rarely play it. And maybe that was one of the reasons that we got exploited often at Worlds, was because it felt like we couldn't play the meta carry tops. And Fudge is trying to do that. He's failing, and I think you can criticize him for that. But the idea of just wanting to sack talk completely and change their play style before they go on stage and try it, I think is a little unfair. And I would rather see a top laner who wants to go and test himself against other top players in the world. But I appreciate the mentality, at least, to say, this is what's good in the meta. I need to be able to play this. I'm going to try and play this. And that's what they're doing. They're failing miserably, but at least that's what they're trying to do. Now, if you want to criticize Fudge for being able to do this stuff in North American ego on the region, then you should actually be more upset at the other top laners in North America for not being able to skill check him at all throughout playoffs, the way he's getting skill checked now in the top lane against the world-class top laners. The fact that he could get away with this in North America, so to speak, and never really be contested is actually a black eye more on the rest of the region than Fudge, who at least could do this domestically, even if he's failing internationally. The other part of this equation is if you take Fudge as a supposed PowerPoint off the map and giving him draft resources, you have to figure out how you're going to approach the entire game from there. And for the most part, Cloud9 has been getting destroyed across the map. When Jensen got counterpicked with the LeBlanc into the Azir against Humanoid, he got destroyed. Bot lane has not been working out. Sven has looked like he's struggling a lot more in the current meta, whether that's meta changes or just tougher competition. It's hard to say. And Berserker is not becoming the same late game bomb that he was, especially with him getting stuck on MF, which is a whole other can of worms to dig into. My point with this is it's not like there's something else working for Cloud9 where it's like, oh, if only Fudge wasn't losing with these counter picks. Like, all of Cloud9 is struggling right now. This brings me to the second point in the video, which is, okay, Mark, that was true for North America. It's not true for international. So you have to adapt your playstyle for international. And this is a sentiment that I can understand where it's coming from, and in a sense agree. The definition of insanity, according to Albert Einstein, is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And maybe you're saying, as we head into week 2, let's swap for it. Maybe you've watched Rogue and Oyoamne playing these weak side tops and absolutely destroying with it and able to take down the best teams in the world. And Rogue is one of the success stories of World so far. They've been incredible, but there's one other part of this equation that you guys are forgetting. Rogue is also just playing good. They're just a good team. Every international competition, draft becomes way too much of a focus for wins and losses, and it's happening yet again here. North America did not lose draft 9 times in a row so bad that we haven't been able to upset one win against our draft priority. It's a much bigger problem than that, and you can't just copy what Rogue is doing. For example, I'm just picking Rogue out, but there's other teams playing this kind of like tank top style. But you can't just take that and slap it onto a team whose playstyle is not that way, for example, like a Cloud9, and then say, go out and do that. One of the things that allows Rogue to get away with this kind of drafting is the fact that their laners are all very strong, despite taking these kinds of weaker laning matchups. You can see that their combined kills per minute are the lowest in the entire tournament because they're playing for this more teamfight oriented approach, but their goal difference at 15 is not suffering, and their kills to death ratio is still strong because they're able to get into the mid to late game without being behind. If you just put a bunch of weak scaling laners for, let's say, Cloud9, since that's who's starting this topic, they're not going to get to that point in the game from Rogue's perspective. They're going to be down thousands of gold heading into team fights. And guess what? North America this tournament has not been good at team fights. Even in games for EG and 100 Thieves and Cloud9 a couple of times where they have been absolutely blown out of the water through the first 50 minutes of the game, their team fights have been absolutely abysmal. Rogue is able to pull off team fights like this in scrappy games and come out ahead from somewhat neutral game states and turning these situations around, whereas North America, they have been late to objectives, their setups have been bad, we're rotating people too late to actually contest, or we're showing up, getting poked off, and picking the fight after the objective's already gone down, like this Baron example, or the Cloud Dragon example. You know, like, these are situations that we are failing fundamentally. And there's a bit of a chicken or the egg argument where you can say, well, if we had better team fight comps, we could maybe be better at team fighting. But I think then you get into the whole early game can of worms where we're mostly getting dumpstered in early game lane phase. You can see that our goal differences at 15 are terrible. And I'm not sure if picking weaker early game for stronger late game is enough of a trade-off. I'm not saying that I'm opposed to it and that it will absolutely fail, but it's not this like cure-all of like, let's go late game team fighting, because yeah, that's definitely where we're going to be strongest. To further highlight this point, you can just look at Breathe when he was on Jax playing into Someday. Despite Someday losing his flash level 1 and forced to take E, he survived the matchup early on, then eventually got an advantage. Closer came and ganked top, and then Breathe was pretty much put in a similar position as Fudge was in his Jax game, where they were down a lot of gold in their top lane. You know, for the most part, RNG did a better job through the early mid game to not fall that far behind. But then in mid to late game team fighting, even with the Jax and the Aatrox, they're able to win team fights, and Breathe is still able to contribute in those situations. The fact that we can't do that despite having sometimes similar drafts or champions in similar situations of having to play from behind despite being a carry champion, it's not like these situations just get solved. You know, like, other teams can do it. It's our mistakes in game that make all these situations look that bad. Now, heading into week 2, the changes I want to see, you can make whatever draft adaptations that you're going to make, but I think I want to see North America take a lot bigger risks in the early game to put us in bigger leads for the mid to late game to make up for the fact that we are struggling in team fighting. The reality is, if you're going to lose games from anywhere from a 2,000 gold advantage to whatever X negative gold disadvantage, then you need to start generating leads larger than 2K. And you need to do that by burger flipping, honestly, because you can't do it through consistent playmaking. And so I would love to see a couple approaches from North America. One, I'm going to call them cheese for lack of a better term. I just think people know what I mean, but it's not like they're totally made up strategies that are win or you're totally out. But, like if you have Rakan, start W, hop a wall. If you have Shen, take E, taunt, try and make a play happen. I would love to see more aggressive level ones. Try and burn some sums early in the lane phase and then repeat gank it over and over again to really get an advantage and really try and snowball through there. That can be level 1 cheeses. That can be strange gank timers, 2 to mid, 2 to top, take your red buff and just instantly go up there and try and make a play happen. This can also be through champions if we want to bust out really crazy champions. I'm all for it right now. I don't know if people saw the graphic that I tweeted out, but like North America, every single one of their teams basically needs to win all 3 games from here. So, I don't mind taking bigger chances here to try and get advantages early on. This also applies to objectives. There's been a lot of times where we feel like the setup isn't 100% right. We're late to getting them. I would love to flip some games at Heralds, at Dragons early on. If the enemy team is down to fight us 5v5, let's try and win that 5v5. Maybe if we ace them there, that gives us enough of a lead to then run away with the game. Obviously, I am scrounging for scraps of how we can try and maybe make some things go in our favor because top to bottom, we are struggling. Like I said, this is the worst North America has ever looked at Worlds through the first round robin. Nothing is really going our way. Early games, the drafts, the mid to late game team fighting, objective control. There's a stat that we haven't taken, the tier 2 turret yet at this tournament. I haven't fact checked that one yet, but I'll assume it's right. So either way, it's not like there's one clear fix that we need to do to improve from here. When you're struggling this hard, there's a lot of other problems to dig into. And I think in future Blame games, we might discuss those topics. But for now, I just wanted to keep it more gameplay oriented and just talk about how style isn't enough to make up the gap that we're seeing here, though I can understand fans wanting to see that. Anyways, that's gonna do it for this episode of the Blame Game. I'll be hosting Hotline League with Travis in Brooklyn at Brookland Cafe, I believe it's called, Wednesday night. That's tomorrow, or tonight if I'm putting this up tomorrow. I'll be back in New York City for that. We'll be watching group week 2, trying to do better. I still believe there's still ways out. Listen, if Fnatic can get out despite starting 0-4 in 2017, North America can do it now. Opium.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching that video. This is my press conference here. Does the lens show the full table? Do they know? Okay, good. I look like I'm at a press conference. I ad-libbed that part and then I was worried that it wouldn't make sense if the crop was. Anyway, so I'm here at Chicago Finals. I want to shout out Alienware for helping to get me here. For years and years and years, I've been traveling to events now, and it's all because of their support. Really appreciate them as a sponsor. Please check out the link in the description. If you purchase something through there, it actually goes directly to helping support the channel. A portion of it does. And yeah, thank you so much to Alienware. I'm going to avoid deep dish pizza for the rest of this trip.